So if any of you do not want to be on camera in the recording, you can feel free to keep your video off. If you are asking a question, please feel free to turn your video on so we can have a more personal experience together. Otherwise, we will be keeping everybody muted, and we'll keep video on of the person who is speaking, which would be primarily Zandy at this point. So take it away, my dear.
Thank you so much, Sky. And yes, thank you. I'm so glad we remembered to record many a Zoom meeting in which I have remembered 10 minutes late. So, all right. So thank you everybody for your responses to our reflection. That's actually the first thing that I want us to do, is to just do a brief sort of review of what you've shared, what you've said about how this shows up in your library, in your community. So I'm actually going to briefly stop sharing and instead share the view of the responses that we've gotten. These are, you know, as we said in the form, these are anonymous responses. They won't be connected to anybody's names, but we can get sort of a sense of who's here and, or not who's here, but what perspectives are represented in the room. So let's see if I can share that screen. Okay, so you should be seeing my anonymized responses to our reflection. And so I love a mixed party. Very succinct, and I think very sort of representative of a lot of folks' experiences that you know, the digital technology in the library tries to cover a lot of ground, right? Wears a lot of hats, meets a lot of different needs for a lot of different people. And then, you know, seeing the issue that I raised initially about, you know, sort of assumptions about who has technology skills and who doesn't, that folks coming in might feel incredibly comfortable with that tech or might need a lot of support. And then, yes, a lot of sort of a big gap between using the library for its for the tech services, for the different you know, maybe software licenses or more advanced services that the library can offer, and then potentially folks who need a lot of very foundational support. And yes, I love this note also about sort of raising awareness and bringing to the community this sense of what even is possible, right? If I'm not plugged into this digital community, this online space, I may not even know why I would want to be engaged in that space. So a lot of different and great perspectives about how this shows up in your work, in your communities. Now, I mentioned at the top that I know that, you know, that we are going to do a little bit of sort of level setting or sort of baseline understanding, but I know that this is a community of folks who already think a lot about these problems. So I asked you about, you know, what does the digital divide mean for you? What does this bring up for you? In order for me to get a better understanding of sort of where your you know, what this means to you initially. And so, yes, I'm seeing a lot of, sort of the haves and have-nots and frustration, which is absolutely valid in my experience too. I want to highlight this note in particular, so those who can afford technology in many formats with appropriate access, right? That when we talk about a divide, when we talk about the haves and the have-nots, it becomes sort of this binary, right? That you either have it or you don't, you're online or you're not. And we know that, in fact, that it is a spectrum of digital inequality. So this person also shared inequality in access and opportunity. That you know, that quality matters, that consistency matters, that it's not just a yes or a no. Great. So this is helpful for me to see where everyone is starting out, and hopefully sort of a helpful initial framing for everyone as well. All right, so let me bring us back to our slides, and I'll say, in terms of our sort of agenda for today, before I pull those up. So I want to do a little bit of initial just thinking, reflection, getting everybody on the same page about when we talk about the digital divide or digital inequality in 2022, right? When you know, we're 2 years into this, 2+ years into this pandemic, The digital divide is a phrase that's been around for 23 years now. So what does this mean to us currently? And then how is that showing up in your specific context in your library? And then we're going to focus, partly because my background is, as I said, in adult education. So we'll be doing a little bit of a focus on the skills piece of digital equity issues, of digital inclusion, thinking about some sort of adult learning principles. And then I think in next week, then, as I mentioned, Sky will be leading that presentation, and we'll be sharing a little bit of a different perspective. So let's bring back our slides, if I may. Okay. All right. So as I said, libraries, digital divide. This is not a new sort of concept for you all to think about. And in fact, this is probably something that comes up a lot in your work and in the way that you think about your work, maybe particularly in rural libraries, in your communities that have been historically less well served by the sort of the market model of let's provide internet to folks who can pay for it. So lots and lots of conversation about this around over the last 20 plus years. And I want to sort of bring us into just a little bit of clarifying of what do we actually mean when we're talking about this. So this is just a little bit of sort of statistics, facts and figures. And actually, I would love to get a little bit of participation in the chat. So overall, as of November of 2021, actually, this is the most up-to-date American Community Survey data that we have. According to that number, or that survey rather, 80% of American households use the internet at home. Now that's for librarians, that's a slightly different figure than folks who come into the library to use the internet or who use it at work. But so in the chat, I would love to hear about what are the factors, what are the barriers or the things that would cause that number to be inconsistently or unequally distributed across society? What makes someone less likely to have the internet at home, to feel comfortable using the internet at home? And I'll make sure I can also see our chat. Okay, yeah, so I'm seeing cost first and foremost, and yes, you are exactly right. That continues to be, in most cases, the number one factor that folks cite when they're asked, hey, you're not on the internet, how come you're not on the internet? That cost, yep, continues to be a big driver. And so yes, income level, sort of demographically speaking. Yes, I'm also seeing some great points about age of the user, and I would maybe frame that a little bit as maybe sort of exposure at in safe ways or in at a point in someone's life when they were likely to get support using it, right? So an older adult who did not engage with the internet in a professional capacity or in school, who was not sort of growing up in that environment, simply hasn't had that opportunity to engage and may not feel like they need to, right? They've gotten this far. Yes, also absolutely, I'm seeing the perspectives about rural versus urban and where the cables are available, limited options for providers in the community, and then also things like lack of support, older devices that maybe increase that sort of the friction or the frustration or potential for problems that folks might run into. And often I think that older devices may also connect us back to this question of income. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so really great answers. I love everything that everybody is sharing. I want to share sort of the demographic breakdown, and I'll sort of spoiler for my data is that I think we're gonna see some pretty familiar patterns of inequality from just the rest of our society, right? That this is an issue that tracks with all of the other ways that inequality shows up in our communities. So I'll pause for a moment and just let folks take in those numbers. Okay. So as we said, things like income continuing to be the #1 driver, but also things like disability status, things like prior education, even things like, so the gap in race or ethnicity and access has been closing and is much closer to being closed than it used to be. But if we think about the fact that these are overlapping categories, right? These are not sort of single buckets. So the discrepancy in race is largely driven by the ongoing income inequality in this country, right? That when we control for household income, that discrepancy in race versus the overall average pretty much goes away. So again, this is digital inequality mirrors and also sort of perpetuates and replicates a lot of the other forms of inequality that we see. Also worth mentioning again, this idea of the sort of spectrum of quality and consistency of access, right? So this is for surveying purposes, they ask very clear sort of quantitative yes/no questions. But for households in rural areas, for instance, we are up to now 79%, very close to the average, which has come a long way. But that doesn't tell us anything about how affordable is that service, or what is the speed of that service, or do folks have options to choose from in terms of what kind of service they're getting access to. All right, so that's sort of our level setting. I also want to bring in a frame that you may already be familiar with, which is thinking about the digital divide as having sort of 3 levels, or 3 levels, I guess is really the word that I want to use. So sometimes folks think about this primarily as an access issue. Do you have the internet or do you not? And we know that libraries, of course, have been on the forefront of trying to meet that need and provide access to folks who may not have access at home. But then once you have access, that still doesn't sort of magically make you happy and comfortable in digital spaces, because you also need the skills, right? Folks have been mentioning this in the chat as well. And you can't really work on skills without access. So we sort of think of these as layers or stepping stones. And then finally, even when you have the access, even when you have the skills, we also still see outcomes in terms of differences in how folks feel comfortable using those tools, what other sort of benefits or opportunities they're able to achieve or get access to because of having those resources. So things like distribution of remote work, or work that is less physically demanding or higher paid, continues to be unequal even when folks have access and have skills. So as I mentioned, we're going to be primarily focusing on the skills piece for today. And this is just partly thinking about when folks are coming into your libraries, right? They are engaging with the access need. They are coming to use either a device in the library or use a device that they already have that they brought with them. But often they are coming to you as library staff for support on the skills piece. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and I want us to do a little bit of an exercise. So this is, I won't put you into breakout rooms. I thought about it, but we will do this one sort of individually. So I want you to choose a familiar task, preferably not a digital task, actually. I want you to choose something that you have done hundreds of times in your life that you can do basically sort of by muscle memory. So I have my beloved coffee here. I often, when I do this exercise, I sometimes choose making coffee in the morning because it sort of doesn't matter how awake I am, I can still do it. And then I want you to imagine that you're going to teach this skill to someone who has never done it before. Not only never done it, but maybe even never seen it done. Just they don't have context for the way that they would go about this skill or this task. And we're going to take about 90 seconds to write down the steps of this task. Now, I'll tell you, 90 seconds is not enough time to actually, as you probably know, to actually write a clear step-by-step guide for almost anything, but we'll do this as an exercise and then we'll see how it goes. So I'm going to stop talking for a few minutes, for 90 seconds, and then we'll regroup and see how that went.
Hey. Good. We scan them, but I don't ever like. No, that's fine.
Okay, so that's our 90 seconds. As I said, this is definitely not enough time to write a comprehensive guide, but hopefully it's enough time to give us an idea. Also, I will say this is an activity that I do when we're training new volunteers for CTN, folks who are going to be providing direct digital skills support to our community members. And often our volunteers have not necessarily worked in sort of teaching or education roles before. I know that you all as library staff, you explain how to do a thing to folks who don't know how to do the thing every day. So we'll see how this goes and how different it is with this community versus with our prospective volunteers. But so I'd love to do just a quick sort of share back in the chat. If you would, first of all, just let us know if you feel comfortable choosing, what task did you choose? I'm always curious to hear what folks ended up picking. Feeding the cats, I love that one. I don't think I've gotten that one before, Carrie. Okay, doing laundry, brushing teeth, good. Excellent. Morning routine, good. Brushing teeth, making eggs, making oatmeal. Tying shoes is a good one. I had someone once do not riding a bike, but just physically getting on the bicycle. Just like the maybe like 1 second activity of mounting a bicycle was great. So, okay, it's an excellent choice. So then I would love to also hear in the chat, how, when you started identifying those steps, did you move sort of linearly, like instead this is first and then this and sort of sequentially beginning to end, or did you have to circle back or sort of work in more of like an iterative sequence to get there? Okay. All right, so most folks saying, yeah, so it started initially linear, but then yes, kept having to go back and add more details. Where Andrew says had to picture the whole process and really think about, okay, what is the first thing that I do, and then and what happens after that. Yeah, absolutely. I find when I do this, particularly when I do this with volunteers, that often sort of we think that we know what the steps are going to be, but then and actually Jill, you're mentioning exactly the issue that sometimes we run into, right? When you think about, okay, when I say for instance, making coffee, when I say put water in the kettle, that without the person there, I can just say, put water in the kettle. But with the actual person who's never seen my kettle before, who might not know that I live in Chicago, and so we have lead-lined water supplies, and so it matters which water and how much water, right? That the addition of details and clarification can start to make that a much more sort of iterative loop as we go, rather than just saying, put the water in the kettle, put the coffee in the thing. All right, then I'm curious again, was there anything surprising or challenging about this as you worked through this activity? Again, knowing that you explain things to people all the time, so you may have a little more practice with this than some folks. Any challenges that came up or surprises? Okay, yeah, Tara says there were a lot more steps than you realized. You could sort of consolidated some of them mentally, maybe. Yeah. I love that, Carrie. The forks for the cat food are different from the forks for the people food. And how do I know which one is which? Okay, good. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we're getting a lot of this this sort of expertise, things that you already know that you've internalized as part of your understanding of these processes that may be pretty hard to explain to somebody else, especially without them here, without being able to actually demonstrate or show, which of course in many cases, hopefully, when we're teaching digital skills, we can show and point and sort of give that that direct demonstration, but not always. I know we got some questions ahead of this webinar about answering folks' questions over the telephone. So, okay, great. Thank you for doing this activity with me. I appreciate that. This is going to sort of lead into our discussion of some core sort of teaching principles or adult learning principles that we find, again, as we're training volunteers, as we're supporting teaching digital skills, that these are some of the principles that we want folks to really keep front of mind. And I will say these are some teaching principles. They are not the teaching principles. This is not, if you Google like adult learning, this is not like the list that you're going to find. Not that there is just one list. So there absolutely will be other thoughts about this, other points that come up as we discuss. But these are the ones that we prioritize when we're, as I said, training new volunteers for how to actually teach digital skills in a way that feels accessible. So the very first one is going to come sort of directly out of this activity reflection, which is the problem of expertise. So I'm going to frame this problem of expertise as that your expertise in a thing, such as feeding your cats or tying your shoes, that this helps you to do that thing very well and very quickly. But after a certain point, it actually hurts your ability to explain the basics to someone who doesn't know what they're doing or how to even get started. So, Carrie, as you said, the choosing which forks to use for which thing, that's a sort of a process that you do probably almost automatically. You don't really have to think about it. And so explaining to someone else, not only that they do have to think about that, but also why and how to approach it. As we gain more expertise, this can become more and more challenging. So I'm curious about actually knowing again that this is a community of folks who explain basic concepts and maybe even basic digital skills to folks all the time. How do you, as probably comparative experts, navigate this challenge when you are working with a novice user, maybe somebody who is brand new to using the computer or needs a lot of support with the basics? How do you make sure that your expertise in doing that thing doesn't become a challenge in how you explain? Okay, great. Anne Marie, yes, try to slow down, limit jargon. Absolutely. Okay, yep, yeah, and Jill asking what they're trying to do, getting a clear sense of the task or the goal before we start giving instructions about how to approach it is key. Facial expressions, yes, absolutely. It's not their fault if they don't understand. Yes, trying to get past the potential sort of shame or embarrassment of finding something difficult, especially something that our society tends to assume that everybody already knows how to do. Yeah, absolutely. And yes, we have plenty of time. We're going to go slowly. And Tara, I love letting them do it rather than you sort of helping by just like intervening and doing it for them. Yes, I love that. Okay, so some really great approaches here already. I'll add a couple of additional points. Some of these are going to overlap with what we said. But so first of all, I want us to think about your expertise in, and we'll frame this specifically as around digital skills, partly as a form of pattern recognition, that your extended exposure to internet tools and digital spaces has given you the opportunity to pretty quickly and easily recognize important information and unimportant information. So for instance, if you actually, a good demonstration of this is if I were to ask you, I won't make everyone do this, but if I were to ask you to unmute yourself in this Zoom room right now, where do your eyes go? Curious, particularly now that we've all sort of been in Zoom so extensively for the last 2 years. Yeah, yeah. So when I say find the unmute button and unmute yourself, your eyes almost immediately go to the place where you have learned, where you expect that the mute button is going to be. But if you look at, sort of to do it like a zoom out and look at your screen, big picture, like how much other information are you successfully ignoring because you know what you're looking for and where you expect it to be, right? So this is, again, when we're training folks in how to teach digital skills, providing that extra cueing of, if I were coaching you right now on how to find the unmute button, I might say, I want you to unmute yourself. You're going to look towards probably the bottom left of your screen for a button that looks like a microphone, and depending on what version of Zoom you're in, it might be next to this button or next to this other button. So providing those kinds of cues and helping folks know what they can safely ignore. That's a huge part of the sort of cognitive overload that we support folks in navigating, is just the extraneous information that they have to learn to not pay attention to. Yep. Yes. And yeah, absolutely. Tara, really good point that if you don't know what you're specifically looking for, it's very easy to make a mistake. Yep. All right. Let's another point that I'll make with this is that, sorry, my doorbell just rang and I lost my train of thought. I hate it when that happens. The other point, oh yes, important versus unimportant information. So helping, especially if you're working with someone over sort of a sequence of interactions, and depending on your context, that might be the case. It might not. This might be the one and only time that you help this person print, or it might be someone who is coming in for instruction or coming in with sort of a series of questions over time. Helping them to start to recognize those patterns, to say, okay, we're looking for the search bar. Where do you find the search bar? And letting them recall, like, oh yes, I remember the search bar is going to be up here. Or I remember that I'm looking for the sort of magnifying glass icon. Helping to reinforce that pattern recognition can be really helpful. All right, then making your thinking explicit is another way that we can help to navigate this, but I'm going to actually balance this with my next point, which is also managing that cognitive load. So as you're explaining why we would do something in a particular way, and Carrie, I'm going to come back to your example of using the people forks versus the cat forks. So if I'm teaching someone to use this fork and not that fork, if I just say don't use that one, use this one, and I don't tell them why, first of all, that rule might not even stick, right? Then they might just didn't get saved in my brain. Or if it does, it might stick in a way that might not be productive in the future, right? Are those forks poisonous? Are they like only for very special occasions? Like what is the reason that I should not use that fork? So providing some access to your thinking as an expert about why, for instance, you want them to just use a search term in the search bar rather than try to memorize and type in a URL directly, can help them to know what's safe to change and what they should continue doing according to a particular sort of rule or guideline that you've shared. However, managing cognitive load obviously is already a challenge when we're dealing with the vast array of important versus unimportant information. And I know a lot of folks said in the chat ways that you think about this already: going slow, taking everything step by step, making sure that you're not using extra jargon that might just be confusing rather than helpful for folks. Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that I'll add, in contexts where you have an opportunity to just spend the time that you can spend, right, and like not be in a hurry or not be trying to get on to the next thing, is this actually sort of harks back to something that folks said about our initial sort of teaching activity, which is that you found as you were explaining the steps, like, oh, there are actually a lot more steps than I realized. But so my brain, we'll come back to my coffee. My brain consolidates, put the water in the kettle as one step. But if I were actually to do it, I would find that first I have to pick up the kettle, to take the lid off the kettle, I have to put the kettle under the correct spigot in the sink. I have to turn, there's a lot of sort of additional small steps that I've consolidated into one. And that's actually a way that our brains already manage cognitive load, the number of different things that we have to keep in our active working memory at one time. So for instance, if I were to ask you to draft an email, let's say, so draft an email in like a business context or with folks who spend lots of time writing emails all the time, that's a single step. But for folks who are very new, there's a lot of small steps involved in actually just starting that task. So as we help folks to manage their cognitive load, giving them an opportunity to sort of complete small loops of tasks a couple of times can help them to then consolidate all of the small tasks that are involved in draft an email or even in, say, open your email into one step so that then that doesn't take up as much working memory. All right, I want to pause here. This is the core teaching principle that we spend the most time talking about. So I want to just check in for questions, for additional sort of points. I know, again, all of you are doing this work daily, and so you may have other sort of ways that you manage this that you want to share as well. Any questions? All right, and actually, this is a good sort of a bonus thing that I want to make sure to mention. You'll notice that I try very carefully to avoid asking, and this would be a little bit odd for me to ask in this format, but even in a one-on-one format, we try very carefully to avoid saying, "Does that make sense?" Right? So you're going to do here, and then you're going to do this, and does that make sense? Why do you think I would avoid saying, "Does that make sense?" And I would instead say something like, "What questions do you have?" What's different about what questions do you have versus does that make sense? Great question, Tara. I'm going to come back to that one. Yeah, thank you, Sky. Yes, so honoring the learner, holding a safe space for learning, particularly, does that make sense? Is it a question that has a right answer, right? The correct answer, the hoped for answer to does that make sense is yes. Yes, that makes sense. I get it. And so for someone to say, no, that doesn't make sense, I'm not following, I'm confused, can feel there's sort of much more of a barrier to feel comfortable telling me that, right? Yes, exactly. So the implication is that it should make sense, and that they have failed if it doesn't make sense. Absolutely. Yep. And so saying instead, what questions do you have? Or what parts of this should we review? Sort of assumes, usually rightly, right, that folks may not just sort of get all of the things and internalize and save all of the things in their mind on the first go round. And yes, Cassandra, I love that point, that even if the specific thing that I just said sort of made sense, or that they followed what I said, that they may find, actually, I do have a question that I hadn't connected with or hadn't actively raised for myself until we asked, what questions do you have? Yeah, okay. All right, I want to come back to, Tara asked a great question. So when they get overloaded, is it best to work through it or stop and do more another day, or do it for them? Such a good question. And my answer that I hope will not be frustrating is it depends. So let me elaborate a little on that. So Tara, do it for them, work through it, stop and do more another day. I think all of those can be good, valid, successful responses to that problem, depending on what the learner or the library customer actually needs. So if, let's see, example, I was recently at my library to print out a form that I needed for the DMV. And the most, like the number one priority for me for that day was that I needed to print out my form and get to the DMV before they closed. And so in that context, Tara, if you were helping me and I got overwhelmed with trying to learn how to print at the library, I probably would want you to just help me print my form so I could get to the DMV. On the other hand, folks who are wanting to develop these skills and to become more confident doing these activities themselves, it is counterproductive, right, for you to just say, oh, let me just do it for them, right? Because then that feels like they failed. That feels like that they are going to have to rely on you to do it for them all the time. So I would say I would ask them, honestly. I would, if they're feeling overloaded, probably for me that's okay. Like let's pause and then see how we want to address, and just ask them, do you want to take a break? Do you want to have me, sometimes also rather than just doing it for them, have them watch me walk slowly through the steps again and then have them try again, can be a good sort of middle ground. But the answer is also going to be different for different people and different tasks. So yeah, that's a great question. Okay. Thank you all for your great participation so far. I really appreciate getting to work with this group. I want to move on to our second core teaching principle, which again, I don't expect this to be sort of new, like a groundbreaking concept for folks in this digital room. But I want to talk a little bit about what it means to use a learner-centered approach when we're teaching these skills. And so when we say that learners or that library customers are not blank slates, if you would just briefly in the chat, what does that mean to you, that they're not blank slates? And I would say really no learner is a blank slate, but in particular, adult learners are very non-blank. Yeah, absolutely. They've come in with expectations, with some prior experiences. Absolutely. Yep. They may come in with some prior knowledge. And yes, Jill, this is key, right? A history where there's a narrative that they're telling themselves, I am bad at this. I have tried to learn this before and I failed and it was scary and I felt yucky about it, right? Like there's often that sort of previous baggage that comes with, and yeah, they view technology differently. They might have different attitudes or different goals that they're bringing in as well. Absolutely. Okay, so when we're working with, and I'm gonna use what in my mind is probably the most common scenario in a sort of a library technology setting, which, and actually I'm curious if this is the case for everyone, but so I'm sort of thinking most commonly about someone has come in to accomplish a task on a library machine, they run into a question and they flag you down and ask about it. We are also going to talk about other formats like more one-on-one structured coaching or other ways that the skill teaching might come up. But so in that setting, when somebody says, I need to print out my form for the DMV, for instance, getting a sense of sort of where are we starting out, what are they bringing with them, and then also where are they getting stuck, right? So we'll fill in, first of all, right, what are their goals and motivations? Is the goal literally just, the DMV closes in 45 minutes and I need this form, which is a totally valid goal. Might not be described as a learning goal necessarily, but is a valid thing to need. Are they, hoping to be able to access more information about things that they're passionate about, and can we know what those kinds of things are? Are they looking for ebooks versus cat videos, right? Those are going to be sort of two different sets of skills that we would want to teach depending on what they are hoping to accomplish. And then finding out what they know already. I'm guessing that based on the responses I've been seeing in the chat, probably a lot of you start by let me understand where you're starting out. So if I need to print out of my DMV form, for instance, I'm gonna keep coming back to that one. It was a formative DMV experience. If I need to print out my DMV form, you might want to know, do I already know where to find that form? Did I have someone email it to me and I need to get into my email? Or are we starting fully from scratch? I just know that I need a form and that's the full extent of the knowledge that I came in with. Using a different example, something like I need to attach a photo to an email. Even somebody who had never worked with sort of this kind of a digital space before, when we're talking about things like files and folders, right? They have a mental framework usually for what a file and a folder looks like, and this idea of like attaching with a paperclip a piece of paper to another piece of paper. And so we can make connections to that prior knowledge depending on what the task is. When I have previously taught things like just understanding internet searching and what is a URL, sometimes we explain that sort of a URL is like an address, right? And it has these components that relate to, you think about a physical street address. So making connections to what they already are familiar with. And then finally, particularly in a context where you're working with somebody who is gonna come back more than once, maybe this is a weekly coaching session or a one-on-one technology tutoring, how are they gonna put these skills into practice outside of the time that they're spending with you, right? So if this is a setting where maybe you have an hour-long technology skills coaching appointment available that folks sign up for, that's an hour out of their week, which I think is what, 168 hours, something. So there's 167 other hours in the week in which they might want to draw on these skills. And so we want to think about how is this going to show up in your life outside of this moment, and what things can you take away from this conversation that you can continue to do on your own? Are there things that we would recommend that you get additional support for before they try to tackle it on their own? All right, so thinking about who is your learner, what do they need, what do they already have? All right, lastly, this is our third and final sort of teaching principle. And this one, I'm curious to know if folks already are familiar with the ZPD, the Zone of Proximal Development. Maybe you can just give a yes or a nope, never heard of it in the chat. Okay. This is, I will say, maybe my favorite learning concept to just drop into conversation at parties, because it has such a great name, the Zone of Proximal Development. It sounds very official. I guarantee that when I explain to you what the Zone of Proximal Development is, that you're like, oh yes, okay, I do know what that is. But it's got such a great name. It's very important for the ways that we think about developing folks' skills, especially because they are coming in with some knowledge already. All right, so the Zone of Proximal Development is most easily explained, I think, through a visual. So this zone exists in between, let's see. I can get my slide to advance. There we go. It exists in between the things that someone can already do independently and the things that they can't do at all. So we can think about this as the zone of things that they can do with help. You might also think of this as if I know how to enter a search term into the search bar, but then that's sort of that's the end of my comfort level. Then the Zone of Proximal Development, proximal meaning next, right? It's the next thing that I need to develop or practice in order to keep expanding my skills of things that I can do independently. Okay. So you might also have heard this term described as things like scaffolding, or just identifying sort of where folks are starting out and adjusting the difficulty level or the challenge of the task appropriately. So as this is sort of coming back to this question of what do folks already know, and then how do we support just that next thing in order to avoid overwhelming them, but also in order to avoid explaining things that they already know and having them feel maybe talked down to or disrespected. All right, so I want to again pause here. These are sort of our three major sort of digital basics teaching principles that we encourage our volunteers to think about. What other questions, maybe particularly challenges that come up as you are providing this kind of skill support to folks in your libraries? Are there other questions or other challenges that we can talk about as a group that haven't been addressed yet? I'll pause for a moment because that was a big question.
I will add, Zandy, too, that
Yeah.
I'm looking at the questions that the group has sent over to us ahead of time, and those that aren't being covered in your presentation, I will be going over in mine. So just as an FYI, if your question hasn't been answered that you pre-sent, we will be getting to it.
Great. Yes. Thank you so much, Sky. I appreciate that. Okay. Oh yes, Tara. Oh my goodness. The forgetting the passwords, or just the hit the wrong key and they fully believe that they have entered it correctly, and in fact there's a typo. Yep. I get mad about that too, right? This is a sort of a universal technology experience in my experience. Yep. So, and I will say, I wish if I had a magical solution to this, Tara, I would be on a beach somewhere, because I would be so wealthy and successful. I probably would still do these webinars because I really like them. But yes, well, so I'm curious. So I know how for myself as a technology user, how I often manage this for myself. Different folks have different ways that they want to approach this, depending on their comfort with trusting their password to an external, like a password vault, or to, if it's on a personal device, to having their personal device save their password. So yes, lots of different ways that folks can approach that. The strategy that I have felt the most comfortable recommending, if the challenge is forgetting their passwords, just sort of as like a blanket issue, rather than like I'm trying to get into my email and I currently don't remember this password, is to use the this is actually this isn't an XKCD comic that you all might be familiar with. Have your password be not sort of a string of jumbled letters and numbers, but a longer phrase that you can remember, such as correct horse battery staple is the example, if you've seen that comic. And then I will typically take that one step further and sort of append the name of the website or like the initials of the website that I'm trying to get access to. So correct horse battery staple Gmail might be my password. It's not, but as an example. But yes, Tara, if I had a beautiful solution to typos in entering passwords, or just trying to retain a password, I would offer it to you, and sadly I do not. Anne-Marie, this one, yes. So needing a verification code, but their phone doesn't get text messages. This one, yes, is a very frustrating thing that I think, again, it comes back to sort of the assumptions that in the tech immersed world, folks who create technology tend to assume that everybody is as immersed in technology as they are and has access to the same technology, right? So everybody can receive a text message. Simply not true. I think I am starting to see a little bit more of, should we send you a text message or an email or a phone call? I'm seeing a little bit more of that, which I think can be helpful. But yeah, when it's only a text message, sometimes that just means that we have to like create a new account or use a different service if we can't resolve the issue that their phone doesn't get texts. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. So Jill has a great question. Yes, so they have come to the library specifically to use technology that they're not super comfortable with, which, like, right, that's a good thing, right? That's a good outcome. We want them to come to the library to learn a new technology skill. But so Jill, I might add the dimension that maybe their expectations may be a little bit off balance with the reality, right? That, like, oh, the library has let's say the library has access to these great genealogy tools, right? That I can go in and find my family, and I can, like, learn my whole family history and make this beautiful, and that's great. But the genealogy tools are on the computer, and if I don't feel comfortable using that interface or navigating those tools myself, my dream of, learning my whole family history is going to be more challenging than I had anticipated, and maybe not something that I can just do in this one visit. So yes, absolutely true. I wonder in that case, and actually I'm curious for other folks, not just Jill, to what extent your libraries are offering not just the sort of like on the spot support, but the opportunity to sort of to make an appointment with someone who will sit down with you for an hour to walk through those skills in a more more of a learning or an instructional way rather than sort of a problem solving way, because that often is where I would point folks to if it's not something that they need to do right in that moment.
I would like to add to Zandy, if you will excuse me, the second part of Jill's comment. She mentions government websites are incredibly difficult or challenging websites or applications, which we were discussing as well. And yes, they can be cumbersome and difficult to navigate. And I have found in my experience that it is possible sometimes to identify somebody who could become a subject matter expert in those applications, social service applications, those kinds of things. And you can partner with your local governing offices for additional training on those sites as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sky. And yes, and that same thing might even apply to the genealogy tools, for instance. That that if there's someone at your library who already is or wants to be the expert in that particular tool that folks tend to have a lot of questions about. Now that I know that particularly in rural libraries, sometimes folks are wearing a lot of hats, are carrying a lot of different responsibilities and trying to meet everybody's needs all the time. And so that can obviously become a challenge. The library that I worked in, we used a team of volunteers who were able to, again, to sort of make appointments or be available on a drop-in basis. And we encourage those volunteers to develop a specialty. Like if you want to learn how to use genealogy tools, I am your human. Or the things like working with ebooks, for instance. Yes, and so Tara, great question. If you start a tech support hour, folks will come in for help that I myself do not know how to do. So yes, that's I do think it's important to frame it appropriately, right? So is it basic tech support? Is tech support the right name, or do we want to call it something like digital basics office hours, or something that sort of sets the right level of expectation? Because tech support also can have sort of a connotation of like, I'm gonna, your computer that is riddled with viruses, I'm gonna fix it for you, which we should be cautious about promising those things, right? The other thing I'll say though about folks asking for help with something that you yourself don't know how to do. Yeah, and so tech tutoring with specifics of what you can and cannot help with, right? Setting those boundaries appropriately. The other thing I would say though is that not to underestimate, particularly for folks who are still sort of basic users, but maybe have outsized expectations, to highlight intentionally the fact that, like, I don't actually know how to do that, but we can research it together. We can, lean on our Googling skills. We can, try to find sort of a step-by-step guide for the specific device that you're looking for help with, or we can find YouTube videos that might help provide detailed knowledge that I don't have. And yes, if it's like a different device that you may not be as familiar with, the willingness to say, I don't know, but I can help you find, or I can, we can look together, we can do some research together. One, helps you to hopefully still meet at least some of the need that's presenting in that moment. And then two, also reinforces this fact, right? This truism that none of us are born just magically knowing how to do all the things. That it is okay to not know how to do the things. In fact, that is normal. And that sometimes when folks are feeling a little bit, what's the word that I want, sort of on the outside of a digital community, they assume that folks who are on the inside that community just like magically know all the things, and that there's not like effort or trial and error or learning involved. And so just providing an object example, or a very clear example of that's actually not how this works, but we can learn together, and we can fall back on searching skills and access to information that the internet provides. I think can be a good response to some of those things. Yeah. I will say also on a very practical note, Tara, your question about sort of tech support hour, I think maybe also includes like, are people, is it drop in, just show up with your question, or is this, which this is what my library generally ended up using, was make an appointment and tell us in advance what it is that you are hoping to work on, so that maybe if we have multiple people who might be able to help, we can match you with the right one. Or if you are asking for help debugging your Linux code, I can just tell you, like, nope, that's definitely not me. Or that we can sort of set expectations correctly, and if it's something that I might need to research, that I can have a little bit of opportunity to do that ahead of time. So yeah. Okay.
I think too, partnering, and this is all, this goes back to manpower again, resources and manpower, but partnering with local entities can really be beneficial. So knowing what your resources are in your community, and if there are local nonprofits or learning programs, in particular workforce skills programs where the students could benefit from potentially volunteering their time and their newly learned expertise to assist others inside of the library setting. That's always a possibility as well. And then two, because many of your locations are small but mighty, and we are all wearing a lot of hats, there is no shame in assisting someone in getting online and pointing them to resources that already exist, so that they can spend some time reviewing those resources on their own. And then if they need additional assistance from you, they can request that. So what I'm talking about here would be your GCF Learn Free application, something that, maybe they want to learn more about how to operate Word, or how to create a spreadsheet or what have you. You can pop them on a tutorial. The work's already, no need to invent the wheel and spend 3 hours of precious time when you have a line out the door teaching somebody something that is already laid out in a tutorial for them, if you can gain them access to it.
Yeah, such a good point. Thank you so much for that, Sky. And yeah, we're already sort of getting into this conversation about program models and different ways of meeting these needs, depending on, is this just like a help me print, or is this a more extended activity? And actually, great question. Yes, so GCF Learn Free, thank you. And so from Albany Public Library, actually, if you, and Sky, can you drop the link to our link tree again, that has just a very small selection of some curated resources. There are lots and lots of good resources out there. GCF Learn Free is one that I recommend all the time. Another one that you'll find in the link tree resources is the North Star Digital Literacy Assessments, which are very, very well designed opportunities for folks to just see, like in this category of skills, what do I already know? What am I not sure about? What do I definitely not know anything about? So that can be a really good way for folks to just like, you know, level set initially and get a sense of what they might want to learn. And yes, digitallearn.org is a great one. The other, let's see, I'm going to stop sharing my slides briefly because I want to also share in that link tree. Let's see, we'll share this instead. So in that link tree, and I heard actually that, so Jessamine West, I think was also did a webinar, which I'm now very envious of anybody in this room who participated in that event, because Jessamine West is one of my professional heroes. So she's got this, the resources from a great talk that she did last year about every problem is now a technology problem. And so I've linked to her slides about this, but she's also got you know, a great set of resources that she's sort of sharing out. So the New York Public Library classes and quizzes, GCF, just sort of very foundational skills. And then also things like articles that might be useful for you as professionals to read, access to resources about the emergency broadband benefits, lots and lots of good stuff in here. In part, I wanted to link to this specifically because she's done such a great job of just curating a lot of those tools and materials already. So those, just to remind folks, so those are available under the sort of further reading and resources. And we've got the North Star Digital Literacy Assessments and the GCF Learn Free links as well. Okay, I'll stop sharing this and we'll come back to the slide about different program models, different ways that you might be thinking about approaching this in your library. Okay, and I'm curious, and I'd love to hear in the chat because we've got some time. Let's see, I think we're going till 1/2 past, so we've got about 20 minutes where we can, you know, use some of this time to answer additional questions, and in particular, maybe to talk about if you're recognizing a need in your library, you know, that like we have folks who can provide just-in-time help, you know, that they need to print a form for the DMV, and somebody can help them do that. But they may have questions that need longer support or that need more of a sort of a consistent engagement over time. I'm curious to hear what kinds of programs already exist at your libraries along these other sort of dimensions or other program models, and if folks are thinking about trying to expand that and then dealing with the questions of, you know, how do we staff it, what do we cover, you know, those kinds of questions as well. And feel free, if you'd rather, you're welcome and encouraged to also come off mute and share your questions if that's easier than the chat.
So Zandy, one question that was sent to us prior to the event is in relationship to the conversation we've had about how everyone has slightly different challenges and it makes it difficult to plan any kind of programming that is, you know, beyond one-on-one technical assistance. Can we maybe take a moment to talk a little bit about that and basic digital skills training and
yes. Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like, you know, talking about programming and thinking maybe about this, you know, sort of structured group classes or, you know, an event on your programming calendar of, you know, we're going to learn Word basics or we're going to learn Instagram or whatever the set of skills are, set of skills is. So yes, I would say sort of, there's a lot that we could say about this. This could be a whole additional conversation. The first thing that I would sort of want to know in that context is how are we identifying the need, right? Is this based on the fact that this is a question that comes up a lot sort of on, you know, in the just-in-time help, that like the most common question that we get is how do we print? And so like that's a need that folks are surfacing. But in some cases, the fact that that question comes up a lot for just-in-time help might not mean that the answer is to have a group class about it, right? Because folks might, that they need to be able to print in that moment, but they might not come to the library for a class about how to print at the library. So the first thing I would say is, how do we know that there's a need? And then based on that knowledge, and can we maybe gather some additional knowledge as well? What assumptions are we making, or what assumptions can we sort of validate or try to test about where folks are starting out? So when I was at the Denver Library, we did this. We got a series of tech programming off the ground, and the first thing that we did was we printed out paper surveys of, here you are at the library. We put them next to the computers, so folks who were coming in to use the computers would see them. And we put them in some of the public spaces as well, of what kinds of digital skills are you interested in learning? Would you come to the library, right? Which of these would you show up for? And then a space for additional things that we hadn't thought of. What are the other skills that are not on this list that you would like to learn more about? And that was really helpful to just, before we tried to offer anything, to just do that needs assessment and have conversations with folks in the community. Then sort of the more specific issue about, okay, so we've started this program, we're offering a class in email basics, let's say, which is I think a pretty common one. And folks are coming in with a wide variety of different levels of comfort or previous levels of practice. Very, very, very common challenge, absolutely. So I would say the couple of things that I would recommend for that, first of all, make sure that you're sort of setting expectations very clearly so that folks can self-assess, is this the right course for me? So if I'm offering a class in email basics, I would make sure that the description includes, we will learn how to use the to and the CC and BCC fields and how to attach a file. And saying the CC and BCC fields, for someone who doesn't know a lot about email, that might not mean anything to them. But for me, if I look at that and I say, oh, I already know how to do that, that lets me sort of I was going to say self-police, which is not exactly the right word, but sort of decide, is this the right class for me, or is there something different that I need to learn? And then I also make sure to address that up front at the start of the class, so that if folks realize oh, this actually is not going to cover the questions that I have, that they know that up front and they can decide, let me actually just sign up for a one-on-one appointment instead. The other thing is that leaving the class may not always be the right choice, that sometimes folks might say, I am broadly familiar with this, but I could use the additional practice, and then pairing folks so that they can answer each other's questions, or provide additional support to other learners who are maybe a little bit behind them can be incredibly helpful as well. This kind of what we call near peer learning opportunities can be a great way for both learners to benefit, right? For somebody who's just starting out to see that, oh yes, there are other people like me who are learning this, who can learn how to do it, and who are just a little ahead of me. And then for the more advanced person to get a chance to reinforce their own knowledge, to feel confident, right? That confidence boost of oh, I was an advanced student in my email class today. That's great, right? We love that. So some ways to navigate that. I'm curious if there are other sort of questions around levels and programming, and what to try to cover and what to defer to maybe a one-on-one session. I'm happy to answer those as well. Yeah, and Susan has a question. Yes, please.
This isn't directly related to what you just asked. It's more from your slide about digital navigators.
Yes.
And we have not, our region, the Capital District region, has not started a digital navigator program, but Lower Hudson Valley, they have started instituting one with their ARPA funds, and they have lots of enthusiastic trainers. And the issue has been getting people to take advantage of the Digital Navigators program. So I don't know, this might be too detailed for a question. You might be talking about it next time, but I don't know if you had any input on like other successful ways to reach people who might benefit from a program like this, because it's like it's much more intensive than some of these other things that libraries are more used to doing, where you can just kind of tweak what you're already doing. So obviously you want to use your resources wisely.
Yes. Let's see. Yes, thank you for raising that great question. And I did, so for folks who are not already familiar with what is a digital navigator, this is a model of support that the National Digital Inclusion Alliance has developed, and as Susan said, a lot of libraries and other service organizations have started rolling out this with some of the funding that they've gotten in the last couple of years. So yes, really good question, Susan, about, we have the volunteers who are here, who are ready, or maybe it's staff who are ready to support, and folks don't necessarily know that they need a digital navigator or sort of self-identify as someone who wants that. So yes, a few things that I would say about that. One is, this is an obvious point, but I think maybe a good place to start, which is to make sure that the language that we're using to talk about a program is the language that someone who needs it would also be using, right? So someone is not very likely to say, what I need in my life is a digital navigator, but we can put together promotional materials, flyers, etc., that address more specifically the needs for maybe help getting accessing affordable internet, or help. Yeah, absolutely. Great point that sometimes we forget the obvious if we're very immersed. So yes, we can start there and probably add some things. So starting with just using the language of the folks who are most likely to need that support. And actually, and I'll add, in a very literal sense, we didn't talk about primary language as one of the dimensions of the digital divide. It's not included in the American Community Survey data that we looked at, but if you have communities of folks who speak primarily languages other than English around you, those often are also communities that, because a lot of the tech tools that they're engaging with are designed in and around English languages, that being able to provide one-on-one coaching, or even just translator services for classes that you're offering can help to overcome that barrier. This is something that, so CTN is sort of always recruiting for digital coaches who can provide coaching in English and, right, so whatever that other language is. And again, this is going to always come back to resources. Like, that sounds great. We would love to offer coaching in English and Spanish, or English and Mandarin, but where do we find those folks? So I know, I think next time, I'm looking at the notes for Sky for next time. I know that we've been working on some curriculum around how do we actually find volunteers to support things like that. And I don't know if that's specifically covered in our conversation for next time. Sky, do you want to speak to that a little?
Yeah, next week is more focused on broadband and devices, but I'm seeing from this conversation that it would behoove us to bring in some talk about programming and how to resource that programming, and how to manage and staff it. Because there are a lot of different opportunities, inclusive of partnering with organizations like ours, locally or across the, we were obviously, we can work remotely now to provide training and to provide curriculum. Whether that's capacity building training on a train the trainer level, or CTN is not providing as much direct service training as we used to, but we still do. So there's lots of options out there and lots of resources, and finding those partners in your community that want to work with you and partner with you as much as you want them to. So well, maybe I'll throw some of that in there too, so that we can really get you guys set up with a strong resource list and the ability to tap into volunteers and the potential to start your own digital navigator or digital ambassadorship.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Sky. And yes, we can absolutely incorporate some of that for next time. The other thing I'll say about sort of, being thoughtful about where are the people who might benefit from this and how do we reach them is sort of literally physically, where are they, what community organizations are they engaging with, and are there ways that the library can go to them? Or even if well, let me back up and clarify that first. So have done in the past with the Denver Library programs where we would go to, say, a faith community where we had reached out to them and they said, oh yes, we have a number of older adults in our congregation who could use support for this, and who are already familiar with coming to our location for events. We could offer it immediately after our services, and folks can just stay for 45 minutes or an hour. So we've done those very successfully. This is not the library that I worked in, but I think this program was in I don't remember what, I wish that I could credit the city library that did this, that was setting up sort of mini library tech tutorials with bringing a laptop or two into laundromats in their community, right? Because a laundromat is a place where folks go and hang out and don't have things to do, and often if they're using the laundromat, that does tend to sort of also correlate with folks with lower income or fewer resources. So just going to the places where those community members are, and just being available and approachable, and then using that potentially as an entry point. Also, paper flyers, right? When we're talking about reaching a community of folks who are not digitally plugged in, paper flyers sort of continue to be the way to go. And so finding the places to hang those or to distribute those where they'll be in the community that you're trying to reach, which again is sort of an obvious point, but one to not overlook.
Oh, and CDLC, as part of this our ARPA funding, we are starting a marketing campaign for public libraries in conjunction with the public library systems, and that's actually going to be, a lot of it's going to be billboards and radio, because that's reaching people that maybe aren't reached through other means. So for those of you who are in public libraries, you will probably shortly next week be getting an email from your systems about a program. The marketing firm we're working with is looking for little snippets of what your library is doing to help bridge the digital divide. So think about that, because we would love to have your success stories, and just the community often doesn't know what you all do. So we're going to put those in.
That's fantastic. I am delighted to hear that, right? Because I wouldn't necessarily recommend, to an individual public library, take out a billboard, but that's a great way to reach folks on a sort of a broader basis. I love that.
Yeah, and I think the billboards are going into the places that are more rural, because that's the main way to reach them. So
Right.
I think I'm looking forward to it. We haven't done anything like this before. So Zandy and Sky, would it be okay if people had follow-up questions or things they might want to clarify in the next section as they go back and think about this? They could send me an email and I could pass those on to you. Does that work? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you can either email me, Susan at cdlc.org, or Megan, MWAKEMAN at cdlc.org, with any follow-up questions, and we'll pass them on and try to address them in the next session.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And thank you for having us. This has been a delight to engage with all of you and to hear the ways that you're already thinking about this and running into these challenges in your daily work, and think about some of the ways that, that we can provide support and encouragement, and also that you all can support and encourage each other. I love this sort of community space that that CDLC has created. So.
Anything else, Megan, or anyone else that's here attending before we let you, I was gonna say get out, but it's pouring here. So
I just want to let everybody know that I have taken down all of the links that we've shared out in the chat. So I will make sure that we put those into a document that gets shared out, a resource document, so that you can find it all in one place. And I'm looking forward to meeting with you all next week and diving into programming options. And we'll talk a bit about digital navigators, digital ambassadors, volunteer programs, and yeah, how to implement, especially on shoestring budgets and with small staff.
Great.